Thank you. Thanks, Vince. And welcome to everybody, including those who are joining us through the internet. Vince Bonelli has been playing for us before the meditation and after and just now. And you might be interested in a meditation and music project that he's part of, which you can find information about on the website. So, this morning we were talking about the need for enthusiasm, the good zeal that gives us the energy, the motivation to stay on the path and to keep evolving, to keep growing on the path. And I'd like to take that a little further and take us into the idea of passion, because it's a very important word for us to understand in this week of Holy Week, as we are moving towards a celebration and a participation, really, in the passion of Christ and what we mean by that passion. And what I've been trying to talk about in these talks so far, like community and solitude, is really pointing us towards a way of understanding the meaning of Holy Week, and particularly the intense, sort of the concentration of that meaning in the 3 days of the Triduum, the 3 days of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and of course Easter Sunday morning, the resurrection. And I spoke this morning about the small acts of kindness that both symbolize and also promote the great act, which is at the heart of all passion and the heart of all love and the heart of meditation, which is the transcendence of the ego. When we hear about these things and reflect on these things, we can approach it from many different angles, and one angle may suit you one day, may suit one kind of personality very well. Another person it doesn't suit at all, they'd prefer to approach it from another way. If you talk about transcending yourself, then some people say, no, I need to reinforce myself and I've had enough transcendence, thank you. Or I haven't got a strong enough ego to be able to transcend it. So this is a dialogue, it's a conversation. And that's what the tradition is really. The mystical or the spiritual tradition is a conversation with many partners and many points of view. And that conversation is something we're part of and something that we learn from if we listen to it and pick up what we find helpful in the conversation, and we can leave aside for the time being something we don't find helpful. We may find it helpful later when we come to understand it better. All of this is really about the opening of the heart. St. Augustine said that the whole purpose of life is to restore to health the eye of the heart by which God can be seen. And this idea that life is a healing process is one that takes us really deeply into the human experience. The experience of the mistakes we make, or the mistakes we have suffered from, maybe the mistakes of others early in our lives, and how we learn from those mistakes and learn to grow through them, both to leave them behind and also to transform them. One of the great symbols of the Passion of Jesus are the wounds that we see inflicted on him. not only the physical wounds of the crown of thorns or the nails of the cross, but we might imagine also the psychological wounds inflicted on him as he was abandoned, as he was betrayed, as he was left alone to face his fate in isolation, or in his deepest solitude, perhaps. So, the opening of the eye of the heart is the restoring to health, is discovering that wholeness which we had from the beginning, which preceded even our own conscious existence. I think in the Zen, there's a Zen saying that we have to learn to recover the face we had before our parents were born. This idea of a kind of a primal innocence or a primal identity before conscious existence is very central, I think, to all traditions. St. Paul says that the mystery of our existence is already located in God before the world began. Until the eye of the heart is opened, or begins to open, it's as if we are flying on one wing. And if you're flying on one wing, you tend to go round in circles, you tend to repeat the same patterns. The two wings that we fly on, if we're working to our maximum, are the mind and the heart. In our culture especially, we cultivate the mind, our thinking. Our education revolves almost exclusively around cognitive processes, thinking. The many different kinds of mental processes, an assembly of mental processes. And it's this excessive emphasis upon mental consciousness that has thrown our culture into such a great imbalance. The mental processes that are involved here are memory, concentration, when you want to learn something or analyze something, the analytical understanding, languages, problem solving, processing information is the way it's most often described. And all of these different types of cognitive activity express themselves in attitudes that we bring to life, or the prejudices or the opinions that we have, with which we often identify ourselves, or the way we vote, or the way we dress, or the way we use our time, or our aesthetic tastes, what we like to watch on TV, or so all of the many aspects of what we would call our style of life or our interests. You know, when you write your CV, you have to put in something at the end saying interest. So a lot of people put meditation, one of my interests. So the way we're trained cognitively, the way we are educated, tends, of course, to become reflected in how we present ourselves to other people, how other people see us, and therefore how we see ourselves, because we see ourselves very much in the way that other people see us. Now, this is all well and good, and no one denies that we should have good mental training, that it's better to learn to analyze a difficult situation logically and rationally, or that we need to be able to classify our memories, that we need to be able to concentrate when we need to concentrate, and so on. So no one's denying that these activities or tools of the mind are not worth cultivating. The problem is, are they our exclusive or excessive concern? And it's an important question for us, I think, when we approach meditation, because when we come to meditation, if we come to it especially through an ancient tradition, the first thing we are told is that at the heart of the practice there is a laying aside of thoughts, all thoughts. Now there are other practices which are cognitive. I mean, I think reading scripture, or examining your conscience, or asking yourself, analyzing your behavior, or asking yourself why you're acting in a certain way, or why you're feeling in a certain way. These are all useful and necessary practices that affect your development, affect your spiritual journey. But at the heart of what we understand as meditation, there is another way, which is the way of the heart. This is the other wing. Remember, restoring to health the eye of the heart, whereby God may be seen. So another kind of knowing, another kind of consciousness. And this is quite a challenge and a problem, I think, for modern people, because especially in what we call the developed world, as I said yesterday, the developed world has become underdeveloped in many important areas, including the spiritual. It's a problem because it's just very difficult for us with our highly developed and excessively emphasized cognitive, mental state of consciousness to really grasp what we even mean by the heart. So we often think the heart means something just about feeling or emotion. And it's true, of course, that feeling and emotion are an important part of our journey and of our health, but it's not actually what the heart means. In the spiritual tradition, the heart is a symbol of the center of the human person, a place of synthesis, of integration, where the different aspects or dimensions of ourselves, our body, our mind, our spiritual or transcendent dimension, are all contained in a single point or a single unity. This is the true self. This is where we are simply ourselves, who we are, when we're acting in simple harmony, out of an integrity or a wholeness. So the heart is what we put into something. We put our heart and soul into something. We speak from the heart. So the heart is what we could call the true self, in which every aspect of the self is integrated and harmonized. So, when we come to meditation then, in its pure sense, we are laying aside our thoughts, we're laying aside the mental processes, we're laying aside cognitive activity. And this is very difficult for us to grasp, to understand, and very difficult sometimes even for us to trust, because in our conditioning, in our cultural conditioning, in our education, we haven't heard very much about the heart, except as something rather vague and flaky and fluffy and sentimental. So there isn't much spiritual dimension in our education. Religion even doesn't give, even in our religious education, which emphasizes very often you know, either the doctrinal or the ritualistic aspects of religious experience. Even in our religious training, there's often not much emphasis on the heart or on the spiritual knowledge. Now, of course, when you meditate with children in the classroom, you realize that they know perfectly well what the heart is. And they can walk into it as simply as we can walk into a room. They just go there. They don't think about it. They can just be there. And I think even the teachers or the parents who see this can't quite understand what is happening, but they sense it and they know it, and they can see the effect, of course, on the children. But it's quite difficult for us later in life even to remember what it means to go into your inner room, as Jesus says, and close the door and pray in the silence of that secret place, that mysterious place. So again, just to re-emphasize, this is not to put down the mind or put down cognition. It's a great tool. Thinking is a great tool, and the more clear our thinking is, the better. We've done great things with our cognitive intelligence, but it can become a very dangerous fixation. If we become fixated upon it, in other words, we don't develop in a balanced way, we don't allow the leisure necessary for the heart to be opened and be awakened, and if we forget what we know intuitively in childhood, which is the coexistence of the mind and the heart as ways of knowing and ways of being, then what happens is we end up flying on one wing, and eventually we get giddy and we get sick of it, and we look for ways to escape from this sort of cognitive, mental trap that we seem to have found ourselves in. And we seek ways of escaping from it by knocking it out. And you can knock out the cognitive processes relatively easily. If you drink the right drinks, or you take certain drugs, or when you go for an operation and you have an anesthetic, it knocks out this cognitive world very quickly. It may, for some people, be an attractive or necessary escape from, especially from this cognitive world, which may have developed some very painful obsessive fixations or cycles or repetitive patterns, and you don't know how to get out of them. So meditation is not an anesthetic. Meditation doesn't knock it out in that way. It's not an escape. But it is a definitive shift to another level of consciousness, to the heart, to the opening of the heart and the healing of the heart, which opens the eye of the heart with time and practice. And because it isn't about knocking out the cognitive mind, but about laying aside your thoughts, that means that over time, if you put in the flying hours, the mind and the heart will begin to operate together in a much more healthy and peaceful and harmonious way. And when the mind and the heart begin to work together, then we begin to see the spirit of wisdom entering our life and helping us deal with the problems and difficulties. So what brings us to this starting point, really, where we turn, for the time being, away from the stream of mental activity, all the cognitive processes. I think it's simply a hunger, really. It's a hunger, a need, an intuition, an instinct, a religious or spiritual instinct, for something more than we can find at this cognitive level. Even at its most beautifully and imaginatively or intellectually developed, the cognitive level of consciousness does not satisfy the deepest aspirations or needs of the human person. And this something more that we are oriented towards, this heart knowledge, we could call God. And to the cognitive person, or to the person who's operating only out of the cognitive level of consciousness, this is not a very nice word, because it's very difficult to define. It means one thing to you, another thing to me. It is culturally conditioned, and so on. So, you know, there's a perception that to talk about God, to believe in God, to use this word God to describe anything at all, is really intellectually unacceptable. And I think this idea has entered very, very powerfully into our education system, especially higher education. You just don't talk about things like God, because you can't cognitively assess it, measure it, or anything else. Now, you could measure, you know, what kind of people believe in God, or how much longer do people who believe in God live than other people, which is longer. And you can do all sorts of experiments and research into God as it affects people and their behavior and so on. But God does not really, you know, God is not exhausted by the cognitive research or examination. So as soon as we begin to turn towards this other level of ourselves, because we're just talking about our own balance, our own integration, that other aspect of ourselves, Father B. Griffiths said when he went to India after 20 years or more as a monk in England, and went in his middle age to India, he went to find the other half of his soul. Well, one way or another, we all have to make sure that the other half of our soul is found, and that the two halves are in relationship to each other. But as soon as we begin to do that, in our kind of culture and conditioning, we're going to experience a certain conflict, because our intellectual, our cognitive level of consciousness is going to resist this heart consciousness. And one of the ways that we can deal with that, of course, is to try to intellectualize the spiritual journey, to make meditation little more than some kind of cognitive exercise. Now, clearly, meditation does have a real effect upon our cognition, upon the way we think, upon the way the mind operates. A great deal of interesting, useful research has been done to illustrate the benefits of meditation cognitively. And those should be welcomed and celebrated. But it's more than that. We cannot measure the heart with any cognitive process. We can't reduce meditation to a technique or to a system of methods. In fact, nor can we even reduce religion in its true sense to a belief system or a set of rituals or cultural habits. Cognitive consciousness, as I said, is a great tool. It can be great fun to use, but it must at some point be laid aside. When we come to the horizon of our consciousness, to the horizon of what can be known by cognitive processes, and we come up against that horizon inevitably, not just because we're on a spiritual journey, but we really become conscious that life is a spiritual journey when we discover, through the experiences of life, of love, of loss, of birth, of death, when we discover suffering and joy, when we discover that there are horizons beyond which the cognitive mind is rather inadequate. We can't understand certain things, the meaning of certain things. So it's life itself that reveals itself to us as a spiritual journey. It's not that we make a spiritual journey within life, it's that life itself is a spiritual journey. And it will teach us this, raise our consciousness to it, simply because of the experiences that build up. And when does that happen? When do we become conscious of these horizons? Well, it depends. It depends on what happens to us and how it happens to us. But it probably happens to us fairly early in our journey. If we try to understand or define the difference between the mind and the heart, between cognitive knowledge and the way of unknowing, which is what meditation is about, the cloud of unknowing, then this can be interesting academically and intellectually, but it can also lead us into just a whole lot of very abstract speculation that doesn't really help us very much. It's still staying on the cognitive side of things. It's as if the cognitive mind is trying to it's not giving up. It just won't give up. It's insisting that it will understand, master, and define what lies beyond its own horizon. So the important thing is really not to try to understand what we cannot understand in that way. You just have to accept we can't understand it. How do you understand what love is? How do you understand what profound loss means, and how we can survive it, and how we can grow through even the most terrible losses? How do we understand the joy of birth and even the joy of death that can be found in the midst of the grief? It's at this horizon of the cognitive that we enter, of course, into the paradox as well, and this is what we'll be doing as we move into a deeper reflection on the meaning of Easter and Holy Week. The important thing then is not to try to explain it in the cognitive way, but the important thing is how does it affect our attitude to our practice, to our spiritual practice. Because it's at this horizon really that we begin to take up a practice. So this is the frontier. And until you reach that frontier or accept that it is there, and of course you can deny that it's there and just deal with it by trying to blow out the cognitive mind when it gets too troublesome. But if you accept that it's there, that there is a horizon of our understanding, a horizon of our being, then it's at that point you begin to be receptive to the wisdom tradition that will bring you, one way or another, will bring you into a spiritual discipline or spiritual practice. At first you may begin that spiritual discipline as a technique, and you're still looking at it as if it were some kind of cognitive exercise, and watching the results. But you won't get very far with that. You won't make much progress with that. You may enjoy certain immediate benefits, but the deeper expansion of consciousness, which is the opening of the heart, the opening of the eye of the heart, requires that we move into a deeper kind of practice, where we are no longer just using it as a technique, but we are discovering that it is a discipline, a way of learning. That's what the word discipline means. And as soon as we begin to practice a discipline, in other words, we remain faithful to a way of learning, then we begin to see ourselves in a different way. Our ego begins to recede into the background. The ego is very much in the foreground in most cognitive types of consciousness, but as we move to the end of, or to the horizon of those of the cognitive mind, as we move into the heart, the ego recedes, becomes smaller, and we begin then to realize, or to ask ourselves a question, or the question of our own deepest identity begins to loom, begins to arise. Who am I? What am I doing? What does this practice of silence, of stillness and simplicity mean? What is happening when I lay aside my thoughts? And actually, when I lay aside my thoughts about what happens when I lay aside my thoughts, when we move beyond self-analysis and introspection, or introversion, I should say. So, it's the beginning of seeing ourselves in a spiritual light as a disciple. Again, that's culturally rather uncomfortable for us. But what does a disciple mean? Someone who's learning. What are we learning? Who are we learning it from? Who is our teacher? In what class am I studying? So all of these, what community am I entering into through this practice? And these are questions. No one's pushing us into this. We're walking into it. We walk into it with our eyes open, but our eyes become more open as we walk further into it. I think this is where also we begin to see that the practice of meditation is, as all the great traditions tell us, and this is very explicit in the Christian tradition, a way of love. We begin to see that the knowledge of the heart is love. We begin to see why the cloud of unknowing, this little book written in the 14th century, tells us that if we want to know God, we will never know God by thought, by cognitive processes. We will not know God by thinking, but by love, only by love. And meditation, in our tradition, is described and understood as a way of love. There are three aspects of love in the Christian understanding, which derives from a remark that Jesus, or a response that Jesus made to a question about what is the greatest commandment. And he said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole strength, and your whole mind. Your whole mind. And then he said, but the second commandment is equal to the first. So a little paradox here. The second is equal to the first, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. So we might say that here Jesus is saying love God and love your neighbor. But he's saying something more as well. He's saying you love your neighbor as to the degree and in the way that you love yourself. So here are three aspects of love that constitute the commandment of life, really, the commandment of human development. We have to discover through our own experience what love really means. Theologically, maybe that is the right order. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of self. But psychologically, in terms of our human development and evolution, it may be more useful to reverse the order. First, you've got to learn to love yourself. And to the degree that you love yourself, and in the way that you love yourself, you will learn to love others. And then, when you love others, the horizon expands even more, even further, and you begin to see God with the eye of the heart. You see and know God in the love that is being experienced in others and through others. So all of this is reflected, I think, in how we approach the practice of meditation. Do we approach meditation just for me? Just for what I'm going to get out of it? Well, certainly we get benefits from it, and those benefits are beneficial. But why are they beneficial? What do they help us to do? What are the benefits, actually, of meditation? When we look more deeply into what the benefits mean, when we, in other words, we stop just measuring them and we begin to see what is happening in them in a human way, we begin to see that these are fruits, spiritual fruits, that something of our essential nature is being revealed, something of who we are, what our real nature is. Something at the core of our being, or deep in the nature of our consciousness, is being manifested in the fruits, the benefits that are arising from this spiritual practice. So we can say, yes, certainly meditation is good for me. But remember Shantideva, the real benefits arise, and the real meaning of meditation arises, and the real meaning of life arises when we see that it is also of benefit to others. So we've learned to love ourselves by meditating a little bit, and then we realize that actually I'm a nicer person to live with. I don't bang the doors so much. I do small acts of kindness to people. I may even occasionally listen to somebody with real and full attention. And I discover as I listen to that person that we are both experiencing the benefits of my meditation. And so we begin, our value system begins to change, our idea of ethical behavior begins to change, and our cognitive reflection on all of this, of course, becomes stimulated as well. We may change our opinions and our views on many things, and change our lifestyle, and change how we spend a week of our lives. So this is the next stage, we begin to love others, our neighbour. Who is our neighbour? Our neighbour is the person we choose to be our neighbour. Not just the person living next to you, but whoever we choose to see and respond to, as the Good Samaritan did. Our neighbour is who we choose. And then the third dimension, the transcendent dimension, which is also implicit in these earlier experiences of love of self and love of others, and then God begins to appear. And when we come to reflect on the resurrection appearances of Jesus, we have a very beautiful and powerful description of how God appears. He's just there. That's how the resurrection appearances are described. He doesn't sort of zoom down into a crowd and people have to move to make space for him. If God were to come into this room now, that's assuming that he's not here already, but if God were to come into this room, he wouldn't displace anything. We wouldn't have to put out another chair. We wouldn't have to bunch up to make room. God is just there, because of course God is everywhere, and God is always there, the ground of being, ground of existence. I am. Without the divine, without God, there is no thing, there is no existence. It isn't so much that God enters into the room, it's that the eye of the heart opens in the people who are in the room and they see what is there. So we move from love of self to love of others, and then in some warm way or other to the love of God. This is an experience of God. You may not believe in God, but you are certainly experiencing this. And because this experience is so strong and so transformative, and it also touches on your cognitive consciousness, you will probably begin to think about what all this means, and why you are feeling and seeing and reacting, and why you are changing in new ways. Children, when they speak about meditation, don't speak about it in God talk unless they think that's what you want them to say, in which case they will. But some of them, I think, are, I don't know, some of them do seem to be genuinely at ease with the vocabulary that they've learnt, and so they can use that language to describe their experience. Others, and again I say I can't judge this, but others, it does seem to me, are just maybe just saying what they think they should say because it's what the teacher expects or what the visitor in the classroom they think would like to hear. But the children themselves clearly have an experience, but they describe it in the most beautifully simple terms, which even if their belief system, or even if our belief system doesn't yet or ever include a belief in God, the experience of God is there nonetheless. So God is more than what we think. Therefore, you may not believe or entertain the thought of God, but that doesn't mean that God isn't there or that you don't know God. So, we come back to meditation as a way of love. To love anything purely is to start on a journey. That's why it's so important to learn to love very early in one's life. That's why it is so tragic if a child is not loved. And that's why it is so worrying when a child's faith in love or understanding of love is challenged or disturbed or broken when a child will say, I can't trust people anymore because I thought I was secure in this love, and now that love, it doesn't seem to be there. This happens, it's, you know, it's inevitable. But it's deeply disturbing. So it's very important that we learn to love, and that we experience love as early as possible, and as securely and safely and as generously as possible, the passionate love that parents have for their children is essential for the development of that child's own capacity to love later. So as soon as we start to love one thing purely, we've started on a way that will lead us to love everything. It's only necessary to start just to love one thing well. Maybe your mummy or your daddy, or your child, or, I mean, even your dog. I mean, it doesn't matter. In a way, you just got to start somewhere. And you know, a lot of therapists will say to people who really have have really big difficulties in relationships, they'll say, well, get a pet. And why not? You've got to start somewhere. If you don't like animals, then you love painting or gardening or something. You've got to love something. And to love something means that you give your full attention to it, that you delight in it, that you would give yourself to it, because love is a transmission of yourself to outside yourself. So we only have to start. But it is about attention, it's about focus. It's about really turning towards the person or the thing that we are learning to love, however inadequately. The love may flicker. It may come and go. We may love for a while and delight in that love, and then we get scared and we pull back because we don't know where it's going to take us. The ego begins to get threatened. So you pull away for 10 years. And then, hopefully, before it's too late, you learn again how to love. Eventually, loving just one thing, or in one small way, will open us to our infinite leisure capacity for universal love. And that is what it means eventually to love God. As Jesus says, we must be as boundless, as whole, as perfect in love as God is. God whose love embraces everything, even the bad things in life. It's impossible to love anything, however, until we've had some capacity awakened to love ourselves. And we cannot really love ourselves without the knowledge that we have been loved. That's why the only commandment that Jesus gave us and the essential morality of the gospel is love. To love our neighbor, to love each other as I have loved you. We'll come back to that little subclause later. So meditation, you could say, is the opening of ourselves to the experience of the reality that we are loved at the deepest, simplest center of our being. And once that is awakened, then everything begins to resonate, to vibrate on the same frequency. Once we've discovered that we are loved, and we have consciously admitted that, then we begin to resonate on this frequency of love in all our relationships. In our work, in our play, with strangers, with friends, with the people we're intimate with. And once this has started, you can't put it back in the tube. It cannot be suppressed, and why indeed should we want to suppress it? Because it is going to be a source of increasing delight. And in fact, we want to tell others. People in love, people who are loving, communicate that love, to share it with others. The deeper one goes into this experience of love, and meditation at this stage, beyond the cognitive horizon, is this journey, is consciously about this journey, then the closer we come to what the masters call union, a union that is realized through a death. So that's when we may begin to start backpedaling. Because it's great to be in union, it's great all this love bursting around us, but what about this death? What the Sufis call fana, or annihilation of the ego. And this takes us, of course will take us when we reflect on it, into the mystery of the cross and of the resurrection. But for now, I'll just end with a few verses from Rumi, the great Sufi poet. Might just be worthwhile saying briefly before we listen to these, and that will take us into meditation. For the Sufi, there are three stages of the process that I've been describing. I spent more time talking about the cognitive because we've got more of a hang-up and fixation on the cognitive than he probably did. But the first stage that they recognize is confusion, that we don't know what's happening when we begin to cross this horizon, when we begin to lay aside our thoughts. We feel disoriented. The cloud of unknowing says, you don't know whether you're coming or going. You don't know what's up, what's down, what's behind you, what's in front of you. And of course, we're going to panic a little bit. And the cognitive mind is going to say, wait a minute, let's get back, let's take out our notebook, let's measure what's happening, let's observe. The Sufis would say this confusion is similar to what we feel when we go into the presence of a very important person. So imagine, I don't know, who's your favorite celebrity? Football player, politician, religious leader. What if the Pope knocked on the door now? Okay, so when you're in the presence of a great celebrity, you get confused. People often don't know what to say, you know, and feel tongue-tied, or and then of course afterwards they say, well, why was I so stupid? Why did I act like that? But so anyway, the Sufis would say this is what it's like when we begin this journey and begin to enter into the presence of love. And then the second stage is where you are intoxicated by love. It's just overwhelming. You just fall into love's delight and embrace and the passion of it. And then the third stage is fana, the annihilation of the ego, the loss, we would say, of self-consciousness, or our consciousness of self as a separate entity. Of course, as long as we're in the cognitive realm, we are separate. We are observers. We are analysts. We are measuring. But when you cross over that line, maybe it's, you know, or move over that no man's land onto the other side, then you are in the realm of quantum physics, and identity and relationship and energy become very different experiences of the self. And that's very much what I think Easter is about. That transition, that journey, that Paschal mystery. Okay, well, here are some verses from Rumi. I am in love with love, and love is in love with me. My body is in love with the soul, and the soul is in love with my body. I opened my arms to love, and love embraced me like a lover. Gamble everything for love if you are a true human being. If not, leave this gathering. Half-heartedness doesn't reach into majesty. You set out to find God, but then you keep stopping for long periods at mean-spirited roadhouses. The way you make love is the way God will be with you. Love rests on no foundation. It is an endless ocean with no beginning or end. Those who don't feel this love pulling them like a river, those who don't drink down like a cup of spring water, or take in sunset like supper, those who don't want to change, let them sleep. With passion, pray. With passion, work. With passion, make love. With passion, eat and drink and dance and play. Why look like a dead fish in the ocean of God? I am at home wherever I am. And in the room of lovers, I can see with closed eyes the beauty that dances. I am at home wherever I am. And in the room of lovers, I can see with closed eyes the beauty that dances. Let's end with these words from the farewell discourses of Jesus in the Gospel of John, his teaching at the Last Supper. But it is not for these alone that I pray, but for those also who through their words put their faith in me. May they all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, so also may they be in us, so that the world may believe that you did send me. The glory which you gave me, I have given to them, so that they may be one, as we are one. I in them, and you in me, may they be perfectly one. Father, although the world does not know you, I know you, and these people know that you sent me. I made your name known to them, and will make it known, so that the love you had for me may be in them, and I may be in them. Good. So we can take a few minutes, if you like, if anyone would like to share any thoughts or any comments or raise any questions. So there was one question that came in on the internet that I saw. I don't have the exact words, but it was to the effect, what
does listening
yes.
to another grumbling turn into, or does it turn into, enabling or reinforcing of the false self?
Okay, so does listening to another person grumbling turn into or reinforce the false self? Grumbling is not, I mean, the English are great grumblers. They love moaning about things. But I think grumbling here means murmuring, what St. Benedict calls murmuring, which is gossiping. And it's a kind of a negative type of talking under your breath or in a corner or when the other person has left the room. And there are degrees of it, of course. It can be very cruel. It can be enjoyable, especially if you're sharing a little piece of private information. We're all nosy about other people. So it can be enjoyable, but it can be very cruel in the same way that, a stand-up comic can be very funny, but also very cruel, and a lot of comedy, I think, actually is about hurting. Although you laugh, you're actually laughing because you're being hurt. Anyway, so I think yes, it can do, according to the degree of the cruelty or the insensitivity or the lack of compassion in the murmuring, in the gossiping. It does infect the person listening. So it may be difficult to say, I don't want to hear that anymore, or please don't. I don't want to talk like that. It may be difficult because you actually want to hear what they have to say, or it may be difficult because you feel you're going to offend the person who is gossiping. But it may be better for you to just say, I've got to go, rather than get caught up in it, because it is kind of infectious, I think. Yeah. Anybody got anything they'd like to?
Sorry, I heard you say this morning, I think, Laurence, something about losses of ritual.
About?
Losses of ritual.
Yes, yes.
I wondered if you explained a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, that was a throwaway. Thank you. Yes, I was talking about how in our culture, modern life, we've really, modern society, we've lost a lot of the value that ritual can bring to our lives. I mean, we all create routines, and I suppose we all develop little personal rituals, but a ritual is really something communal, something in which you participate with other people, and that's at a low ebb, I think, in our certainly in terms of religious ritual. I mean, there are other rituals like football matches or concerts and political rallies even, or things like that, which I suppose are kind of rituals collectively, but and they can be very, very helpful and enriching or stimulating. But I think religious rituals take us to another level, or operate on a different level of consciousness. And as we will experience when we celebrate the rituals of Easter over the 3 days, they're very ritualistic days, and I think for a lot of people today they are meaningless. So I think we are impoverished by that, because it's a loss of a language and of a capacity for transcendence. And without those kind of rituals, we are really thrown back upon ourselves as a kind of a flat, two-dimensional existence, really. And we're thrown back upon just what I'm feeling in a very individualistic way. And I mean, it's understandable in a sense that people will say, I don't get anything out of those rituals of going to church. So there's no point in me going, because you're sitting there in a cold church and listening to a bad sermon and to a ritual that isn't being performed very well. So why bother to go? But, so I mean, it's understandable, and people of course are free to do that, and they do it, but so we should try to make those rituals more meaningful, more alive, and to update them, upgrade them. And it doesn't mean to say you just have to modernize them, but you have to upgrade them to speak to a contemporary audience. And rituals evolve in the same way as other aspects of historical culture evolve, although religious people often become very conservative and attached to their rituals. And I was advising a priest the other day to take out all the pews in his church, and he looked at me with incredulous expression. And so I think we do have to look at ways of refreshing those rituals, and the ritual space especially in which we celebrate them. But we are diminished, I think, if we can't lose ourselves or let go of our isolated, more atomized kind of identity in those kind of rituals. And I suppose people seek that experience of transcendence in other ways, in other places. But there is something in the religious ritual or the religious language that takes us to a place that is very nourishing for us. John Maine believed that the way back to understand and experience those rituals in a life-giving way was through meditation. But actually, by awakening the inner dimension of your spirit, yourself, then that inner life connected with the rituals, perhaps even if they weren't very well performed. And I remember meeting a woman once who said, she was in a meditation group. She said she couldn't go to church, because of the way the church was treating women and the exclusion of women from life of the church in many areas, important areas. So she was very hurt and angry about that, and understandably she said she couldn't go to church. But a couple of years later, I didn't see her for a couple of years, and then when I saw her again, she was in the church where I was. Actually, I forget what we were saying, mass or anyway. She was in the church, and I said, "So are you going to church now?" And she said, "Yes, I am." She said, "I haven't changed my opinions," but she said, "I know there's something here that I value and love and benefit from." So meditation can awaken that connection again.
I have a question about the love. You said in theological sense, it's probably the way that first you love God, then you love your neighbor, and then you love yourself. But in a practical means, it's maybe the other way around. But is there not then a danger that kind of you just get caught up in the first stage of, you feel like you should love yourself first in order to be able to love your neighbor and love God? Is it not dangerous?
Well, there will be some people who would say it is dangerous. But I think there are people who say meditation is dangerous. Maybe for the same reason. But I think it's only dangerous if what you are actually doing, was not loving yourself, but just feeding your ego, stroking your ego, cuddling up to your ego, and indulging your ego. If that's what you were doing, then that would be a very false kind of spirituality, just as it would be a false kind of therapy, but you could fall into bad therapy as well as that, in the same way, couldn't you? So, how do you distinguish between those two? Well, it's difficult to distinguish those things on your own because you may not have any reliable, you may not be objective enough or detached enough from yourself to be able to do it. You may not have enough experience to be able to distinguish between the false indulgence of the ego and what is really the love of self. So I think, again, that's where community is important. And the community, if it has any depth to it, of substance, is a manifestation of a tradition. So it carries in the mind of the community some of the wisdom of that tradition. So that community should be able to help you to make that discernment, and it would do it not sort of maybe very directly by preaching at you or by telling you what to do, but by example, the way the community lives, or the way it teaches, the way that it passes on some of the wisdom of the teaching of the tradition. So in that way you would absorb the criteria or the values that would enable you to make that distinction. You've got to hear it somewhere, and that's the problem, I think, for lots of people who don't have any community or any tradition to gel with or connect with, because they're frightened of, getting trapped in it or getting taken over by it, or they want to stay at a safe distance. Anyway, that's the danger, I think. if you don't have that kind of example. It's example building. And the test would be, does it make you a more loving person? And do you feel that you're becoming a more loving person?
But I think ultimately true love cannot be contained, to a dimension, like the self.
Yes.
Or let's say I truly love my neighbor, but I don't love myself. I think true love moves into all those three dimensions simultaneously.
Yeah.
It cannot be contained in any one of them. So I don't know actually if the idea of sequencing it is maybe pedagogically it's a useful thing sometimes to think about the sequence, but I think in reality true love manifests simultaneously in these three dimensions, and it touches on them. Perhaps there's the beginning of love, and then there's the deepening of love, and then there's the further deepening of love, but it's in all those three dimensions.
Yeah. Well, it is, I think, but it does, on the other hand, it takes time.
Right.
And the time that it takes will be reflected in different parts of yourself, the inner or the outer aspects of yourself, according to your own unique history, your own unique formula. So, but no, I agree. It's all three are activated at the same time, but maybe not all manifested at the same time. And I think, that's why it is important in a community to have a conversation about these things and to reflect on them, because sometimes the answer to these questions is quite simple. If you are trying to love others really genuinely and hard, you're trying to love them, but you are really not able to love yourself. You don't accept yourself, you don't know yourself, you judge yourself too harshly, and you're still suffering from pain that has been inflicted on you in a way that makes you self-rejecting, then your love of others is going to become problematical. You may get codependent on the people you're trying to love, or you may exploit the people you're trying to love, or you get angry with them because they're not playing the game that you want them to play. So, and the cause for that, it may be complex, but the cause for that may well be that you haven't really started to experience what love of self means.
I wonder if you could expand a bit. You said at the beginning about the dialogue between the ego and the renunciation of the ego at the beginning of the talk, and I find what you say about renunciation of the ego very powerful, particularly thinking about Easter. But I think also in terms of applying that, say, in a world of work, where projection of a very strong ego is often, in some ways, almost feels like a form of survival, or is required in some way. And so for me, it's about how does one implement that in practice, in a sense, throughout one's life.
Yes, well, I think that's in an intense competitive environment where the majority of the people are not committed to the principle of self-transcendence, apparently, or not interested in it, then and may be driven by quite instinctive forces, and living under great stress and fear, and controlled by fear, then it is difficult in a way not to feel I've got to play this game the way they're playing it, otherwise I won't be in the game. However, I don't know if that's altogether true, because it is possible to be in the game, if you think the game is worth being in. I mean, that's another thing. If you think the game is worth being in, that's a job worth doing, then you focus upon the worthwhileness of the work. And I'm here because I think I can make a difference, or I can do something good through this work with this team of people. That's the first thing, I think. The second thing is you try to see the best in the people who are acting maybe rather badly or aggressively or dishonestly or competitively. And if you can see their motivation, then I think it's much easier to at least have some moments of compassion for them, so that there's another channel in you open to them. And then the next thing I think is that you may, I know people who have said they are staying in their job until they have been able to, I don't say master, but achieve some level of self-control or some level of excellence in their way of working with people. So that the job itself, in a way, becomes a spiritual practice. They see in themselves and in their relationship to the people they're with, they see all that's going on, and they may find that they're caught up in it sometimes, but they'll know that they're caught up in it, and then that will be an opportunity for them to try better next time and to learn from their mistakes. So the whole meaning of that game, that jungle, can be changed. And the person who is operating in that way, in that state of mind, I think it becomes a wise person. They become, and even though they may not know it at first, but others in the team will probably look at them and see them over time as someone to be trusted, someone who's got integrity, someone who is honest and transparent and human, but also a person of moral or ethical values, and that person then begins to change, can begin, I think, seriously to change the culture of the team, especially if they're in a leadership position. Sometimes even if they're not in a leadership position, you have one really grounded, centered person in a team, even if it's, the person who makes the tea, they can make a big difference to the mood of the group, but especially if you've got a leader who has broken through into that kind of understanding, they can change the chemistry very powerfully, I think. And it would give them a great feeling of satisfaction to do that. Not pride in the ordinary sense of the word, but a real sense of satisfaction that their way of working was also, with the team and with the objectives of the team and the goals and so on, that their way of working at that level was also in harmony with their inner work, that they were actually spiritually or humanly developing through that external work, so that the inner and the outer were becoming more and more in harmony. But so I think it's depends upon the individual. Right? I mean, there may be circumstances in which that's impossible. I did have a friend some years ago who was very committed to meditation and teaching meditation, and a good teacher, but I hadn't seen him for a while, and I said, how are things going? And he said, fine. He said, I actually gave up meditation there. So I said, why? So he said, well, we were going through a very hard time at work. A lot of people were being laid off, and a lot of suspicion and, lack of trust. And he said things got a bit nasty in the atmosphere, in the environment, and he said I felt, I could watch it, observe it, and I didn't get caught up in it. But then he said I suddenly got scared, because I thought, well, if I'm feeling this, I'm actually very vulnerable. Somebody may put their knife in me. So he got scared that he was being too nice and gave up meditation to protect his job and become nasty. But it didn't. I don't think it lasted very long, where he said a few months maybe, but he thought, well, this is a bit silly. So he came back to it probably at a deeper level.
A short reflection on what we have said about trying to measure the benefits of meditation. It has reminded me about a research project that was conducted, included Tibetan monks, and scientists were trying to measure benefits of loving kindness meditation. And they put these wires on their heads, and they suddenly apparently burst out laughing, because they were quite surprised that scientists were trying to measure loving kindness here and not here. So it's interesting how the scientific world were trying to put everything into numbers. Either it's measurable or it doesn't exist, as if God would be, as if we were able to prove the existence of God. And sometimes I wonder whether, if it was actually possible to prove the existence of God, to put it into numbers, if God was so simple, whether people would be interested to follow Him.
It's true. It's true.
Isn't it a big mystery in all traditions?
Yeah.
It's something that you cannot prove, you can only experience it.
I think that's very true. But at the same time, even though the real mystery is in the heart of those meditators who are learning to be more kind and loving, I think it is also seems to be possible to see reflected on their brains what is happening. But the reflection in the brains and the different parts of the brain which are affected by meditation, and brain waves and even the thickening of the brain and so on. Anyway, different things that happen at the physical level, apart from the fact that you feel better, they're interesting. They don't explain anything, really. And I suppose the scientists might and should continue to pursue that connection, maybe in the hope that they will find that God can be reduced to a formula or a number. And that's their job, is to keep using that method of investigation. But it doesn't seem to me that it would ever do that, but it may lead to other interesting discoveries. That methodology is not going to explain or define the mystery of the human, let alone the divine. But in the process, it may well lead to the opening of new experiences or new windows of knowledge and understanding. I mean, in the same way that, this is the best example, that the space program in the US. Because I was getting a bit spaced out now. Hearing myself. You have what I'm going to say on that as well.
I will not tell anybody.
Anyway, the space program in the US, of course, had tremendous spin-offs. I mean, video games and mobile phones and many of the gadgets that we into computer software and stuff, all these were spin-offs of the space program. So maybe a spin-off of that kind of research, neurological research, might be in other areas. Good. Well, let's go and enjoy our dinner, and thank you to all those who joined us from many parts of the world, and thank you for your messages, because we enjoy reading them after dinner, and we look forward to meeting tomorrow.